Now, if I were asked what do I think is the most important part of storytelling, what one thing do you absolutely have to get right if there's any chance of telling a good story or making a good movie or a trilogy of movies, my answer would be, well, there's a lot of things you'd need to get right, but if I had to pick one to be the most important, it would be narrative cohesion. Your story, quite simply, has to make sense, and everything about it and the characters within has to be consistent and to have a flow from one event to the next. And say what you will about the Star Wars prequels, the films themselves, but at the very least they did this, and did it extremely well. They had consistent and ever-progressing characters, and a story that made sense, that went from one event to the next in a way that built to an enjoyable conclusion. Now sure, the execution of that story, of the films themselves, I should say, wasn't exactly perfect. I think even the staunchest prequel defender can admit there was at least some room for improvement, but at the very least, George Lucas nailed the story behind it all, if not a perfect telling of it. Which then brings us to the Star Wars sequel trilogy, and whether you love or hate the sequels or fall somewhere in between, or maybe only like one or two of the movies, the lack of narrative cohesion across the trilogy should, and likely does, frustrate or anger you. Some of us waited over 30 years for these movies, only for them to not take the time to sit down and put together any sort of real solid game plan or outline before they jumped right in and started making the movies. And instead of one mastermind behind the story to hopefully assure it all made sense in the end, or even a group of people that came together and agreed upon everything from where the story would ultimately go to what the major story beats would be to get the characters there, they just winged it, I guess, letting different writers and directors do whatever they wanted with the story to make it up as they went without worrying too much about consistency, and we fans were just supposed to like it, I guess, because it's Star Wars. And look, I don't necessarily want to dunk on the sequels anymore. At this point, it's like, I don't know, dunking on a 5-year-old during a game of Nerf basketball. Now, sure, you can do it, but it's so easy you can't or shouldn't feel very proud of yourself afterwards. However, in the last week or so, some new pieces of information have surfaced about them that the media has reported on as if they were revelations somehow. Like, can you believe it, that it seems maybe J.J. Abrams and Rian Johnson weren't on the same page when it came to the story, and that no one above them had any real idea what that story should be. No one was presiding over everything. That these two guys were literally just doing whatever they wanted with their own movies. And yeah, not only can we fans believe it, but we've been saying that for years at this point. We thought it was kinda obvious. Nevertheless, plenty in the media seemed surprised when Rian Johnson said in a recent interview that there was more of a full handoff between 7 and 8, just as it was from 8 to 9. Johnson would then go on to say that, in his view, there was a romantic-type relationship between Rey and Kylo Ren, or Ben Solo, and that he didn't know that Ben would die at the end of Episode 9. However, shortly after The Rise of Skywalker came out, J.J. Abrams told us there was nothing of the sort between them, that the kiss Rey and Ben shared was more of a friends thing. And I mean, you can be all aboard the Reylo ship if you want to be, or think it's something that should have never left port in any respect. Either way, this, not to mention the ultimate fate of Kylo Ren, is something these two guys, Abrams and Johnson, at the very least should have discussed and agreed upon. Now, they didn't need to agree on every single little detail in the films or story, but at the very least, they should have talked and figured out how the two main characters of the trilogy actually felt about each other, and what sort of ending they're trying to set up for them. I mean, that would have been the bare minimum needed to have any hope for narrative cohesion, and it seems they didn't even do that. They just handed off the story. But not only that, but in Episode 8, Johnson seemed more interested in subverting the story Abrams started. He treated The Force Awakens like an inconvenience to the story he wanted to tell, and just changed it when and where needed. And then, of course, in Episode 9, Abrams retook the helm and seemed more interested in just getting back to the story he started and ignored the middle part that Johnson told, and even completely undoes the huge reveal that Rey is nobody, even though her being nobody may have actually once been originally his idea, and the one thing the two maybe even agreed upon. Because very recently Daisy Ridley said that she was told from the start that Rey was nobody, and told this all the way up till the rise of Skywalker, when of course she became the granddaughter of Palpatine, or the granddaughter of a failed clone of Palpatine if you go by what we learn in the novelization of The Rise of Skywalker. Anyway, what's really curious about this is that, like I said, apparently, and if what Daisy Ridley said is accurate, the original idea was indeed for Rey to be nobody, even though what most people got out of The Force Awakens was apparently the opposite of that she was somebody, and that there was intentionally a giant mystery placed around who she is by J.J. Abrams. However, I always kind of thought maybe that wasn't the case, that maybe the movie might be trying too subtly apparently, trying to tell us that she was indeed nobody. And mainly I based this off two things, the first of which being that Maz Kanata told her at one point that the belonging she seeks is ahead of her and not behind, as if trying to tell her and us, the audience, where she came from or who her parents are is not as important as where she is going and who she will turn herself into, which is a very Disney message after all, and the second thing I based my line of thinking off of. And yes, for the record, I was indeed talking about this years ago, before The Last Jedi ever came out. In fact, my video where I suggested all this, that Rey might be nobody, was essentially the video that launched my whole YouTube career and is the reason why I'm here today at all. Either way though, the whole Rey is nobody thing was handled horribly from the word go, and I certainly understand why people thought Rey might end up being the daughter or granddaughter of this character or that one, and I'll confess, I originally thought the movie pointed at Luke being the father, until I watched it a few more times, or too many more times, and thought about it more, and I mean a lot more, that I started to think the mystery around Rey might actually be unintentional. Anyway, though handled horribly, I think it could have worked and worked extremely well, Rey being nobody, I mean, if done right. If it was not only the agreed upon plan from the get-go, but if they'd also come up with and built towards a very meaningful ending for that concept beforehand. But again, you would have needed narrative cohesion. You would have needed Johnson and Abrams sharing this same vision, or someone above them dictating one vision to both as the trilogy went on. And call me crazy, and I know some will, but I'll even go so far as to say, again, if done right from the start and planned out, that Rey being nobody who takes on the Skywalker name to honor them after they're all gone at the end of the trilogy, it could have worked. We could have then definitively said that, yes, the story of the Skywalkers is over, yet it's also just beginning in a way. And to accomplish this certainly would have required several major changes, and like I said, it would have needed a solid, well thought out plan from the very start, and not the least of those changes would have been making it absolutely clear Rey was nobody from the very start, right in The Force Awakens, so that the internet didn't spend 2 years coming up with theories about who she is that got fans excited for what comes next, only to be let down by the no one reveal. I think we also would have absolutely needed things like Luke training Rey to see these two form a legitimate bond as master and apprentice, and yes, I think Leia could have played a part in all this as well, if Luke still ended up dying in Episode 8. And I think we would have also needed Anakin Skywalker to have a part to play in this story, not a huge one, but rather just an important one, and that the story built to bringing what should be and would be a lasting balance to the Force, not that Return of the Jedi didn't end that way as well. Those, I think, would have been the keys, though certainly other changes to the story, big and small, would have been needed if you wanted to end the Skywalker saga with no living Skywalker and someone taking up their name. And one thing I don't think you wanted to do was have a Palpatine taking that name, but well, that's what we got. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you think. If things were done differently, could Rey Nobody taking the Skywalker name have worked? Could that have been a great way to end the saga? And what do you think about Johnson saying that there was a full handoff between the movies? Now, it's not really surprising at this point, other than he would admit to it, perhaps. Now, whatever you think about any and all of this, do leave a comment below, and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.